Well, Dave.
Rob.
The moment's been prepared for. 130-something people voted for it. The Girl Who Waited.
The Girl Who Waited.
Gosh, where do we start? I guess maybe some background to us seeing it and coming across it originally, perhaps?
Sure. Do you want to go first or shall I?
Oh, look, I'll dive in. I saw this at the time of transmission, and I wasn't overwhelmed by the season at the time. I mean, think this is Curse of the Black Spot, Rebel Flesh, also People, Good Man Goes to War, Night Terrors, Territory. I felt the series probably had as many hits as misses, or misses as hits, at the time. And then this came along. And then the God Complex came along, which I also adore. And that might be a hint as to what I think of The Girl Who Waited. And so I saw this as part of a little upswing towards the end of the series, where these two episodes back-to-back were decent. And then Closing Time came along, and it wasn't god-awful. And there was this nice little tale on the end of this season that I quite liked. And I've got more to say, but I'll stop there.
So my first experience was slightly different to yours. This is a very rare example of new Doctor Who that I did not see actually going out. There are two periods in the series history since it came back in 2005 where I didn't see it go out live. One was the back half of season 3 where I was at Air Force officer training, and there was an officer's mess with one television, and you're not going to spend your Saturday afternoon desperately trying to get all the others to watch Doctor Who.
I can imagine.
Just as you can imagine. So I didn't see that too much later. And the back end of Series 6. Like you, Rob, I really struggled with this season. I got to the second half of the Rebel Flesh and I just didn't watch it. I just disliked the first half so much, I've just gone, I'm not tuning in next week. And I then gave A Good Man Goes to War a go, and I didn't like that at all. Fortunately, there was a mid-series break. You remember? It was like best part of 6 months, I think, between the first and the second half of Series 6. The first episode back was Let's Kill Hitler. I thought, nope, open mind, go in, fresh start. Let's Kill Hitler came on, and at the moment where the Doctor came out of the TARDIS in a tuxedo, dancing around and just waiting to die for no apparent reason, I thought it's time for Doctor Who and I to just have a break from each other.
That was the moment.
That was the moment. And so I did. I didn't want to be, I've said this before on the podcast, I didn't want to be one of those people who just turns in, not enjoying the show, just to bitch about it later. I thought, let's just not see each other for a while. And so I didn't watch Series 6 go out anymore. But across 2012, I did sort of do an episode every now and then when I was, bored, quiet weekend, whatever. I thought, okay, I'll sort of work through this. So at some point I got to The Girl Who Waited, randomly on its own, in the middle of 2012 on a quiet weekend somewhere.
Wow, so that we do have a really different sort of take on where we were coming to this originally.
We did. So, Rob, 10,000 feet looking down on this episode, what do you think? What's your vibe?
Dave, I think this is great. I think this is really Moffat-y, with the ideas about time and how that's played with. And now, I'm not saying that Moffat has that sort of story locked up. It just feels like an idea he's had and tossed out for someone else to write. Or at the very least, Tom McRae, who is the writer here, came along with an idea that's so Moffat-y, it appealed to Moffat's narcissism, maybe, about his own writing. And he said, yeah, I'll have that. I'll stop there for the moment. But yeah, I think this is great, and I think it's Moffat-y.
I didn't actually know that this wasn't written by Moffat. I'd always assumed it was. Yeah, I just assumed that it was written by Stephen Moffat until I was looking to see who directed it, and I saw who wrote it. I was like, that's not Stephen Moffat. Okay. So I had no idea. There were huge parts of this episode I had completely forgotten. I've seen it once 8 years ago, and I remembered a couple of the key beats, I remembered a couple of the key scenes, but a lot of this was very new to me. I found this was a episode of 3/3. There was 1/3 where I was really intrigued and actually really getting into this episode and finding a lot to like. There was another third where I was, not quite sure this is working. And there was a third I thought, this is absolutely horrible Doctor Who.
Really?
Really.
Oh, we're going to need to tease that out.
Yeah, so that's my headline.
All right. Well, look, before we move on, I'll also add the story is quite timely given COVID in some ways. I mean, I don't want to overplay this, but when it starts and they're like, oh yeah, there's this virus going around and we're in this place where people who have the virus get sent. I had completely forgotten that aspect of the storyline.
Yeah, me too.
I might not have even put it up for a vote if I'd consciously thought about it, because I thought, oh, that's right, there's... Oh, you know, I'd not put two and two together at all. I'd forgotten that aspect of it completely.
Yeah, me too.
What do you want to tease out first, Dave?
I think that it would be useful to tease out how this is set up, because I think this is very much the strength of the episode. I don't know whether it's the strength of the episode for you, Rob, but or just a strength, but it certainly is the strength for me. And that is that I was being very effectively engaged by this episode as I watched it. It starts very much bang, you're in. They're arriving somewhere, they're discussing it, they're bantering. Then you're out there, you're exploring a new world. You then very quickly work out what the conceit is. You know, it reminded me a little bit of the start of Ark in Space, this empty, sterile, white area. One companion presses the wrong button and suddenly they're off in another place. Very, very Ark in Space vibes. That interested me. The moment when Rory then goes and pushes the red button, but he can't get to Amy, I'm like, okay. And that was really, really interesting to me. And it then went on to creating a world that I was drawn into, and I was intrigued. And there's stuff I want to talk about the location, but I don't think we're there yet.
Do you know? In those early scenes, I really like the way they're talking to Amy. Then I think they get distracted or do something else, and they come back to her, and she's like, "I've been here a week," and it had been so long since I'd watched it, I didn't have all the story in my head, and I thought, oh yeah, that's a bit cheesy. Like, what's she eaten? You know, why isn't there a pile of poop in the corner of the room? If she's really been there a week, she should be looking a lot more, you know, bedraggled. You know, that's not done very well. And then almost immediately, and I love it when a story does this, the story answers the question that's in your head, and the doctor deduces that time is moving differently there, and that's why she hasn't had to eat, she hasn't felt hungry.
It doesn't quite make sense, and it doesn't quite work if you actually put it under a microscope. But yes, it works enough. It is, as we keep saying in the podcast, Rob, the cover it with a line.
Yeah.
You know, you're sitting there going, why doesn't she need to eat? Why, etc. And there's a line in there that goes, she doesn't need to eat because and you go, well, okay, that works.
Yeah.
It's stupid, like it doesn't work, but it works.
And I just want to say I'm glad it did that, because sometimes stories don't do it and they are infuriating, but here it's like the writer respects you enough to know what you're thinking and answer your question, in the question in your head. It
would have been very hard to buy what's coming down the pathway in this episode if they hadn't had that cheat in there.
Yeah, that's true as well.
What's a key highlight for you, Rob? What's something you want to talk to us about and really flag as a strength?
I'll actually start by talking about something that's not a strength for me usually, and that's Amy. I have always had a problem with the Amy character, going back to when she tries to have sex with the doctor in the second or third story, and it's like, I don't like this character at all, and I found it very hard to warm to her. So at the time of transmission, even though we'd already had Amy's Choice in the previous season, where I'd had to admit to myself, I don't like Amy, but I really like this Amy story, here we had another Amy-centric story, and I went into it thinking, I don't like the way they're bigging Amy up here. I don't like her character. And in this one, giving her the samurai sword and some of the stuff she does with it. Like, there's one scene where she runs into a room like she's Obi-Wan Kenobi and swings the sword around. There's no one to even fight. It just looks really try-hard. And I was having these huge issues with Amy. I could see that I liked the story, but Amy was kind of an impediment. And over time, as I've gotten a bit better with not so much liking Amy, but maybe tolerating Amy, I look now more towards the character stuff and the emotions of this story. And I'm not as put off by them trying to big up Amy and make her this, you know, superhero type person, which is how I really felt about it originally. I can tuck that away a bit more now. And, you know, and I can see they're just trying to show her as being different to the younger Amy. Like, this Amy's grown up and she can use a samurai sword. Okay, fair enough. So I have a more stable relationship with the premise of the story now and the main character, who is Amy.
Okay, we're going to disagree a lot today, I think.
Oh, okay. Millie Mackenzie will be so happy. Hello, Millie.
I'll start with a point of agreement, which is, like you, I rate Amy's choice as one of the highlights of the Matt Smith era. I thought that and Vincent and the Doctor were the two absolute standouts, not just from Series 5, but from the whole Matt Smith era. And they're both Amy-centric episodes, and so, you know, although Amy doesn't always appeal to me, I can love Amy-centric episodes. Mm-hmm. I was very impressed as well by Karen Gillan's performance here, and even though she was under some not always convincing old person makeup, I thought that as an actress, she very clearly delineated the two Amys. Like, you knew, even without the makeup, you would have known which was which, and I thought that was a very good performance from her. However, where I differ from you, and I differ very strongly, is that I found that all of my other knowledge of Amy and all of my other experience of Amy bled into this story and made it absolutely impossible for me to buy it and to buy what happens in the story. Shall I go down this path now, Rob? Because this is a key.
What's an example of that?
So, I view the Amy-Rory relationship as a fundamentally unpleasant and toxic relationship. I think the way that Amy treats Rory consistently throughout their relationship is horrible, toxic, unpleasant. The way she's willing to cheat on him with the Doctor at a moment's notice was just awful. The way that she's belittling him, that he will drop everything for her. I mean, and we'll get to Rory shortly because Rory's a big positive in this one. Spoilers, but he is. the way that Rory treats that relationship and what he gets back from Amy, I have consistently found unpleasant and nasty and horrible. And so to try and hinge a whole denouement of the episode off us having to buy this love between two equals, I just sat there and thought, no, this is a horrible toxic relationship and I'm not buying it. And in fact, the way that she is talking to Rory and the way that she is so dismissive of Rory's feelings and so selfish in what she's doing, sure, within the story context, I get why you would be after being left there for 30 years or whatever it was, but it just reminded me all about how much I dislike this character and her relationship. And then layering on top of it, if I say that the Rory-Amy relationship is toxic, when you put the Doctor into that threesome, that just becomes a whole new level of unpleasantness. And again, this sort of, not sexual tension, but emotional tension between the Doctor and Amy versus the Amy and Rory, again, just makes me feel so sorry for Rory and so disliking of Amy. I've said before about both Amy and Clara, they are characters who, if they were out to dinner with me, I would not want to talk to. I do not find them likeable people. Compared to somebody like Bill Potts, who I just go, I want to go to the pub with Bill Potts. I want to go out for a night on the town with Bill Potts. Like, she would be awesome to talk to. Rose, for all her faults, would be, you know what, I could go out and have dinner with Rose and like have a great conversation. Captain, you know, etc., etc., etc. I could not do that with Amy. I could not do that with Clara.
All right.
So the episode relies on you buying their love, and I don't. So it actually had the wrong emotional effect for me.
I've got a counter to this, Dave.
Good.
And that's the writer, Tom McRae, fully acknowledges this flaw in Amy in the story when she names the robot Rory and refers to him as, yeah, that's my pet. And it's showing that, yeah, she treats that robot Rory like a pet, like she has treated the other Rory like a pet. And I think what it's trying to show is that when she has time to reflect and then talk to her younger self, like I guess we'd all like to do sometimes, go back and talk to our younger self, and she's like, oh yeah, he's the boy who came back from holidays with a funny haircut and said he'd been in a rock and roll band, and he was the one who did this and he was the one who did that, and the Macarena was our first kiss. And when she remembers all these things, I think she realizes what she has in him, and the love sort of comes through. So I don't think it shies away from the fact she has been quite nasty, dismissive, treating him like a pet. I mean, it's explicitly said through the robot that she's been treating him like a pet. I think this is maybe the story where, and I don't know if it plays through in future episodes very well because I can't really think of what happens in future episodes, but I'd like to think this is the turning point where she realises that, yeah, I really do love this guy now that I've had time to think about it and talk to my younger self about it, and she has a change of heart.
And I totally understand where you're coming from, and that is a perfectly valid and reasonable way for it to work for you. I don't dismiss that at all. But for me, when I compare... And this is what I'm talking about in that this episode doesn't exist on its own. It exists in a context. And when we look back on the whole Matt Smith era now, and the whole of Amy's time in the show now, and it exists in that context. The series before, you had Amy trapped in the big cube thing at the end of the series, and Rory basically sacrificed 1,000 years of his life to guard her. He made himself subservient to her to keep her safe. In contrast, when she's stuck alone for 30 years, she makes Rory her pet, and it makes him subservient to her. And I don't know whether this is a deliberate move on the part of the show. I don't think it is, but the way that she can so easily dismiss Robot Rory and just go, well, you were a pet for 30 years, you've been my one companion for 30 years, but, oh, the other guy's back now, bye, and completely dismiss him. I thought there was going to be some sort of emotional, like, I've got to let go of my Robot Rory now. But he was just discarded, and that, to me, just reinforced my feeling of how disposable Rory is in that relationship. And then in the next series, they're separating. Like, they go through that whole breakup. Yeah. And so it just, to me, made Rory feel disposable, and I really don't like Amy because of that.
Food for thought there, I think, from both you and me for the listeners. Before we go on to Rory, perhaps, though, I do want to say about Amy and Karen Gillan, of course, this was without a doubt the hardest role in the episode to play the two characters. And I did some background reading, and she actually went to some lengths with her mannerisms and did some voice training.
For sure.
And even there was some extra padding in the costume, not to make her look fat, because she still looks quite lean, but so that she'd actually move a bit differently, move like an older person. So they did put in a lot of effort there. But what astounds me, Dave, is that they did this stellar job with the mannerisms, the voice. I think they tried very hard with the makeup. Sure, it doesn't work sometimes, but there are other times where young Amy and old Amy are together, and they do look very different, even though it's both Karen Gillan.
Yeah.
But the hair, Dave, literally nothing with the hair. She's meant to be pushing 60. She should be grey, noticeably grey. I mean, just between you and me, Dave, just about every woman I've known has started going grey in their 20s or early 30s. And here she's almost 60, and she's not grey at all. I thought that was very weird, and it actually distracted me at times. I was looking at it thinking, you're old Amy. Why don't you have grey hair? It would be the easiest thing to do.
It's really funny, isn't it, just how that can be something you notice and that bugs you. And until you pointed out to me, I'd completely not thought about it.
No. Oh, no.
Yeah,
I've ruined it.
It's just, and I just think that's really, like that's really, really telling that we can both watch the same show and something that was kind of bugging you, and it didn't even occur to me. Like that just shows how different people can see a show so totally differently in microcosm. I like it, but no, I totally agree. Karen Gillan's performance and what they do with her is really, really good. The makeup isn't always ideal. It's suddenly, but yeah, very, very good performance. I want to make that clear.
Shall we talk Rory?
Rory is so good. I love Rory.
But before you go on, why did I have the feeling I was like setting a spinning top then? Like I just had Rory and off Dave goes. Oh, Rory.
Look, he has been for me the standout highlight of the Matt Smith era. It's not an era that I go back to that often, and so I haven't actually seen a lot of him. But watching this one just so quickly, I just thought, this is why I know I love Rory. He's such a lovely person, like such a wonderful person. He is genuinely kind. He is genuinely thoughtful. He is genuinely brave. He is such a good character that I want to be Rory's friend. You know, I just want to be Rory's mate. And Arthur Darvill's performance is so subtle, even when he's playing against Matt Smith at Matt Smith's most unsubtle, and there's a lot of that in this episode. We'll get there. Even when he's playing against unsubtle Matt Smith, he's still on the level, and I admire that so much.
Yeah, look, that's something he carries on into Broadchurch, where he was the local minister. And I'd watch Broadchurch and think, I'd like to be friends with this guy. This is the kind of guy I could be really good mates with, even though I have no interest in religion. Can I be friends with a minister like this if I have no interest in religion? I used to go on flights of fantasy about, being friends with a minister because of the role he played in Broadchurch. It was very similar to Rory in some ways. But you're right. He is painted in this story as such a gentle, loving man. There's a moment where he sees echoes of hundreds of people who've been in the facility, and he wonders if they were happy. And the doctor says, "Oh, Rory, only you'd think of that." And that's just one of the scenes that gets played up a lot, I think, because we know at the end he's going to have make this terrible decision, and it's like this lovely, lovely man has to make this terrible, terrible decision. And I jotted down the line, "This isn't fair, you're turning me into you," which he says to the doctor at one point. And I think we see Rory really stressed in this with the choices he has to make. Just an incredible choice he has to make. Which Amy does he want to keep? And then when it's clear that the doctor's actually been leading the older Amy along and has no intention of taking her, how he has to deal with that and have the conversation with her.
Yeah. I think that's where we need to go next in our conversation, Rob, because that's a very important point. But again, what sold me in the first third of this story, which I think is by far the strongest part of the story, was Rory's reaction to everything. He was curious and he was heartfelt, and I felt like this was a genuine identification character in the most true sense of the word, and that's a real strength of this episode.
Yeah, I do agree.
So, should we talk about the doctor?
Yeah, look, I'll jump in first because it sounds like you might have some negative stuff to say, whereas I have some nice things to say, so I'm going to say them first. I think the doctor gets some nicely dark scenes in this story, which I always liked because I think Smith does dark better than Tennant. Because I think Tennant always felt like he could go mean at any time, whereas Smith is... He doesn't always notice the effect he has on people, and because he's a genius, he can say things that rub people the wrong way. But it's always in a sweeter way. So when he goes dark, it's like, oh, shit. Whereas when Tennant went dark, it was like, yeah, Dave's being dark. Great. So I always really liked the Smith Doctor doing dark. Even at the end, when the young Amy sort of sits up and is like, oh, where's the other me? And Smith just looks at the camera with this super dark expression and then looks away. I love that in the Doctor. I mean, that's something we hadn't really seen much of since the darker McCoy sort of stuff. It's the stuff we all sort of fantasized about during the Wilderness era. Surely, Dave, it's good. I really like that.
I spoke earlier about how I'd seen a Charles Dickens story at the movies. Mm-hmm. So let me say this about The Girl Who Waited. It was the best of Smith. It was the worst of Smith.
Nicely played.
There is some really good classic Smithy stuff in here. His stuff, again, in the opening episodes, just grabbed me really quickly. His enthusiasm for the world they were about to visit and then to explore was exactly what I wanted in the Doctor. It was really good. That weird doctoriness that Smith just has so naturally came across throughout the episode. So those best aspects of Smith's Doctor were definitely there. So before I go negative, and I am about to, I want to give that praise and say the best of Smith is definitely on display here. You mentioned before, Rob, the line, "You're turning me into you." I don't like the idea that my Doctor is somebody where becoming him is bad. That actually sits really, really uncomfortably with me. The Doctor can be alien. His morals can sometimes be differently perspected from ours. But at his heart, he's never cruel, he's never cowardly. He's a good person. And we all want, we should be better for knowing the Doctor. You look at the Russell T Davies era, and that is all about so many lives being better because they met the Doctor. So this idea of the Doctor just being so horrible did not sit well with me. And this episode does kind of rely on a lot of conceits. It relies on the conceit that Amy presses the wrong button, despite one being green and on the top and kind of a more natural pick. It relies on the conceit of the technology not working. It relies on the conceit of the robots now are killer robots because I'm not sure. Can we explore that in a moment? But the biggest conceit is the idea that the Doctor's kind of stupid. Maybe stupid is the wrong word, but the Doctor makes really fundamental mistakes regularly in order to continue the plot going. And then it ends with the Doctor being callous and manipulative. I can live with the Doctor being manipulative when it ends in the destruction of the Daleks. The Doctor being manipulative and it ends with Rory just being emotionally shattered, particularly given how much I've just said Rory is a natural identification character for me. You know, I want to be like Rory. I want to feel like Rory. Rory's who I want to be as a person. For the Doctor to then treat him that way felt very personal to me and very, very unpleasant. And I just thought, I don't like this.
Interesting. Yeah. Look, I can see very clearly what you're saying, and
I can see very clearly what you're saying. Like, this is a genuinely interesting conversation to me.
Yeah, it's. I mean, what other choices does the Doctor have? I mean, he's stuck in the TARDIS because again we have the conceit that with his two hearts or his Time Lord physiology, he can't go out where time is moving in a different way or whatever it is. And so he's sort of stuck in the TARDIS and does have to manipulate the situation. He has to get Rory out there to save Amy. The older Amy complicates it. The two Amys talk and decide the older Amy's going to save the younger Amy, but actually she's playing them because she's actually going to come along as well. That's her real plan. And the Doctor's having to sort of manipulate things to counter all of these things while he's stuck inside the TARDIS. So what other choices does he have? I think he's in a hard place.
He's definitely in a hard place. Sidebar, the Doctor not being able to leave the TARDIS, because I'm not quite sure why, is another conceit in a story that is quite full of them. The Doctor had the choice to tell the truth.
Yeah, but what would that have done?
I get that, and that's a complicated thing, and it's not an easy thing. But lying was not like he wasn't lying to get a nice outcome. He was lying to get, I would suggest, an equally bad outcome. But he did it by lying to his two close friends. And I just can't. You asked me what choice did the Doctor have? To my mind, being honest with his two close companions surely is another choice. We can explore if that was the right choice or the wrong choice, but we can't say that he didn't have another choice.
Well, the other choice was to take the old Amy and let the young Amy grow to be the old Amy and then come with them then, and it becomes a loop.
Or simply to say to them, look, there are two possibilities here. I can rescue the young Amy and the old Amy, you will cease to exist. Do you choose that? Which in the end she does do. You know, she does accept that when it's explained to her in a particular way. So it could have ended that way, or to do what you suggested. But he could have got to the same place without doing what he did to Amy and Rory.
I think there's a line where he justifies it at the end. You say, he lied for no good reason, but back in the TARDIS, he says to Rory quite plainly, I told you we'd get her back, and we got her back. There she is. And he just walks off. Like, to him, that's what he said he'd do, and he's done it.
Yeah, and I can totally understand somebody watching that and thinking that's a really cool Doctor moment. I totally can. But it didn't land that way for me.
On a side note, I don't believe this is regarded as a Dr. Light episode, but it feels like Smithy could have recorded, I don't know, about 80% of his role in just a day or so, because it's just running around the TARDIS talking to, scanner screens, basically.
Yeah, he's only on 2 sets, so yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that's the case. I will say as well, just as a small thing, he did get some very good lines. I think my favourite was the, and that'll be the small act of vandalism alarm. That actually made me laugh out loud. That was, again, a really good Smithy moment.
Yeah, there are some very funny lines in this story, like when young Amy and old Amy are together, and they're like, well, how would we make this work? And Rory says, well, at Christmas you always say you want an extra pair of hands. that was like a laugh out loud moment for me.
Yeah, there were some very good funny stuff in here. It is a very well written script. The robots, I really liked the design. I didn't understand why they were killer robots. Rob, could you explain that to me? Did I miss a line?
Well, I think at the beginning it's, Amy, you don't have the physiology of the natives of this planet. So any drugs they try and give you will kill you. I mean, that's a bit extreme to assume they'll kill. I mean, they just might make you ill. But it seems they have the ability to knock you out by touch. It's sort of an anesthetic. Yeah. Yep. And then they administer the drug, which must be to counter the plague that all the people who are in that facility have. And because Amy is not of that race and doesn't have the plague, being given that will be like a toxin, I guess. And so that's why they will kill her. They keep saying this is a kindness, because to them it is a kindness. It is weird that she tries to reason with them and even reason with the supercomputer that's sort of running the whole thing, and it still won't sort of understand that she's alien.
It's a really interesting directorial decision. I would be very interested to know if the writer intended the way the robots were displayed to actually be that, in that they're kind of directed and designed as scary killer robots, in that they do have that, this is a kindness sort of catchphrase that's got that evil undertone, and they open their head up to have this horrible sort of Star Wars torture device looking thing, and they chase around and they can't be reasoned with, and all the rest of it. It felt to me like the director or the designer or someone's gone, scary killer robots, awesome. And I don't think that the script wanted that to be the case. I thought they wanted it to be a little bit more subtle. I think there's a bit of a dichotomy in intention there, but they do look good. They are scary. Like as scary killer robots, they work.
Oh yeah, and I do think there is the intention, like you're saying, because they talk about the hand being very human-like, and I think fleshed-like. They talk about being fleshed-like to actually be a nice thing, or a kindness, as it were. Yeah, but something might get lost in translation a bit there. I'm willing to concede that.
Location stood out for me.
Yes, I was going to say, the garden, of course, gets reused when we first meet Missy, and she's dancing around that sundial in a garden. I believe that's exactly the same garden. Interesting,
because I did make the note here, and at the time, this felt like a very unusual, exotic alien world. Watching it this time, I thought, this is one of those things where they go to a brand new conference centre and just pretend it's an alien world, which they would do a lot of as the series went on. I don't remember them doing that much of it before this. I think it's very clever, and it looks exactly the way it should, and doing it on location in that way is so effective. And I totally know I bought it the first time. This time when I was watching it sort of with the intention of making notes, I did sort of go, that's a convention centre, or whatever it is. So I thought it looked great, but it just amused me, because I think that became more of a trope after this.
Yeah, I think of one sort of camera angle in particular. I'm like, oh yeah, I think that's the bar. like where you line up, when you're at the opera or something, you go out and get a beer.
Yes.
So that's the location done and dusted, Dave. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we get into our wrap-up?
One final point, and I think it's a good one to do before we get to the wrap-up. You mentioned earlier, Rob, about whether this would have an effect going on. I got to the end of this one, and I actually did keep going and watch the first 10 minutes of the God Complex. And I was quite surprised that there was no reference to this at all, and Amy and Rory and the Doctor were all bestest buddies again. And it kind of reminded me that this wasn't written by Moffat. Because I think if this was a Moffat script, there would have been a tie-in emotionally to the next episode. I think that they would have started the next episode where they finished this one, and they didn't. Again, that's probably not the episode's fault. Like, I can't downgrade The Girl Who Waited because the God Complex forgets what's happened. But I did find it interesting.
Well, with the way this season was put together, is it possible that maybe they were just doing standalone episodes because they didn't know where they'd even slip them into the running order, perhaps?
Yeah, look, it's very, very possible. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just very un-Moffat-y. Like, we talk about Moffat, and one of Moffat's abilities, whether you like it or not, is that he does put together these long season expanding emotional character arcs. And so I just was genuinely surprised that, like, gee, I wonder how they pick up from here in the next episode. No, they don't.
Yeah. So, overall, do we like it, Dave?
No.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Short and
I'm
sweet.
sorry. Yeah, no, look, there was stuff in here I enjoyed a lot more than I remembered. There was stuff in here I really appreciated. I think it looks good. I think it's written well. I think that the regulars, particularly Gillen and Darville, give really good performances. There's a lot to like in here and a lot to respect. I can certainly see how it would land emotionally for another viewer. But let's not pretend that it didn't end exactly where it had to. Like, there was no way the Doctor was going to take both Amy's along for the ride. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like the Titanic in that sense. Like, you watch that movie knowing at some point the ship has to sink. I watched this episode knowing at some point old Amy has to go. For all the things I liked about it, and there were a lot of things, at its core, it asked me to buy into a relationship that I do not like or respect. Mm. And that grated very, very badly with me. And when I added on top of that the fact that I did not like the Doctor was not just weird, not just alien, he was he was an absolutely unpleasant bastard. Mm. The net effect of all that is that I left the episode very unhappy, which is a shame because at the start of the episode I was loving it. Rob, what about you?
Well, earlier you said that I pointed out Amy's red hair wasn't grey, and now, you probably can't unsee that or unthink that. I'd largely forgotten about their relationship issues. I knew that she sort of treated him like a pet. Of course, I always remember how she tried to sleep with the Doctor, etc., etc. But the actual minutiae of all that, I had just forgotten. So to actually be reminded of, this was a bit of a weird, toxic relationship, does sort of colour how I see things now. Although,
sorry,
that's fine, because I did counter earlier, and I think it was a strong counter that she has treated Rory like a pet, but through talking to her younger self, she comes to realise that.
No, it absolutely was a strong counter. And I totally buy what you're selling.
Yeah, and I think that's there. But overall, I think this story is a great standalone piece in a sort of an era, the Moffat era, where there were a lot of arcs and things being tied together, and River Song would come back and this would happen and that would happen. To just have this one little story, I thought was really great. And something we didn't touch on, the music. I think the music in this was really good. I like the Dark Doctor. You say I say Dark Doctor.
Yep.
And I think they do so much with just the three-person crew of the TARDIS, some robots, a location or two. To me, this is clever Doctor Who. This isn't throwing 10,000 things at the screen and hoping if people are wowed by half of them, then they'll think they saw something good when perhaps they didn't. I think this is doing the hard yards, the hard graft, and making something bigger than the sum of its parts. It's just like 3 actors, some robots, 2 sets, and they make something out of it. I really, really, really like episodes of Doctor Who that do that. I think they take more imagination in general. And for that reason alone, I think I like this episode.
Rob, there is nothing that you've just said where I'm sitting there going, did Rob and I watch the same episode? There's nothing like that. Every point you make, I'm going, okay, yeah, I see that, I get that. And this has, to me, been a really interesting example of how 2 people can watch the same 45 minutes of television and be impacted completely differently.
And particularly with it being so far in the past now, I think we can both see it with different eyes, for better or worse, than we did at the time.
Yeah, I think so. There was, as I say, there was stuff in there that I had completely forgotten. There was stuff in there I enjoyed a lot more than I remembered. But we are each also bringing our own personal baggage to the episode, which is inevitable. That's a reality. You think of certain Star Wars movies. Different fans brought different personal baggage to those movies and walked away with completely different perspectives of the outcome. I think that's a very natural thing. And again, maybe I'm just trying to justify my dislike of it, but I do think it's been a really interesting conversation from that point of view.
All right, well, let's get some listener feedback on the episode. I'll kick us off with Owen Price. He's Kellogg's24 on Twitter. Hello, Owen. Always a good person who feeds back to us a lot on Twitter, actually, Owen. He says, I love this episode. Amy is kick-ass, and the choice Rory has to make is heartbreaking. The real consequences of travel with the Doctor are explored and moral questions abound. Not sure why McRae hasn't written more episodes, really. He clearly has a red pen. Which is a reference, I think, to us talking about Chris Chibnall not having a red pen.
Yeah, that is definitely a very good comment about McRae. He writes very judiciously and very conservatively and says a lot with not much dialogue. I think the problems in this are a lot more about the final production than they are about his script.
Fair enough.
We have one here from Millie McKenzie who says, looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this one. I've watched it only once, but I remember it was kind of trippy and had one truly heartbreaking moment, and we got to see a side of the Doctor that was not too pleasant, that she would lie to old Amy that she would be rescued too in order to save young Amy, or something along those lines. You know, I just need to go watch it again. I've probably got it all wrong. No, that's a pretty good summation, Millie. Thank you.
Yeah, and she says a side of the Doctor that's not too pleasant. You say
it's a spectrum.
Good. Now, when we threw this out on Twitter, and I think, Dave, you said, I'm gonna go and watch it now, make my notes. We got one from our mate Rob at 42 to Doomsday, Dr. Sinister, Dread Sinister. He says, pray for him. Let's pray for you, Dave.
Thank you for that. I appreciated it. I promise I went in with a very open mind. I promise.
Very good.
We got one here from Scott Michael via Facebook, and he says, I've only watched the Smith era once as transmitted. This one was a standout in a mixed bunch. I think that Scott's view is probably the majority view.
I think so too. I really genuinely do. And finally, Oscar Groucho at Oscar Groucho is another regular correspondent with us on Twitter. Hello, Oscar. He says, a Decalogue short story in a season of bombastic myth arc stories. Remarkable, yet poignant. Imelda Staunton, sterling support showing the chops that would later make her Netflix's final inhabitant of the crown. Always a pleasure to speak to you folks. Keep up the good work. Stay safe. And for people out there who are wondering what a Decalogue short story is, there was a series of Virgin books. Oh gosh, this would be mid-90s, I think, Dave. They were the Decalogue books.
Yeah.
And they were literally short Doctor Who stories. And they were often quite imaginative. They were always on a theme too. They'd sort of get a general theme and link all the stories together through a theme. And I can see exactly what he means by saying it's a Decalogue short story, because it is this lovely little self-contained thing that almost could be a short story, Dave.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really insightful comment there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so cheers, Oscar.
Well, that's our listener feedback. Thank you, as always, for contributing. And I look forward to hearing some comments next month about whether you agree with Rob, me, neither of us, or both of us.
Exactly.